So I don't think that this is a layer that anyone's been introduced to you just yet with. Tell me about your spirituality when you're in a prison cell for these few months. What did it do with your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How did you keep yourself going? What was your relationship like with the Quran? What was your salah like? What was your dua like? Like, what happened to your ibadah as a result of that, those few months?
You've mentioned the story of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. And in prison, I was so inspired by his story. And I remember reading it once and more again in prison, especially all the injustices that he went through, and that those in power put him in jail for doing nothing wrong, for standing with what's right at the age of 30. But there's one particular aspect of Sayyidina Yusuf's story, is that he did not just do nothing in jail or in prison. He actually wanted to support his or the detainees around him, wanted to make a meaning out of his suffering, and I was so inspired by it that I would really just being inspired by that story. I would go to other inmates around me and ask how I can support. That I refuse to just wait for my fate and just sit and not do anything and wait until the court or the lawyers say or do any of that. And it was Ramadan when I think it was the first week of Ramadan when I was kidnapped, and the first thing in jail, there's a very small Muslim community there, so I would say 10% of all detainees. So we were about 7-8 Muslims in my dorm out of 70. And I was the only Arabi there. I was the only Arab in that cell. So I remember I would lead prayers there with everyone. I would help our brothers from Chechnya and from ex-Soviet countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, would help them with Quran pronunciation. I remember would write Quran in English, just to help them out in pronunciation of Quran. And I mean, spiritually, and I think I'm repeating it right now, but in such circumstances, you feel very invisible. You feel that the world forgot about you, and you need something to actually keep you going, and that of course was just my faith, my iman, and also just the stories of support, the outpouring support of toward me from the world.
SubhanAllah, I remember you writing down the du'as. You had a notebook and you were writing down the du'as to say in prison. What was your favorite du'a in prison?
لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين, and dua Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam. And I'm not sure if people know the story, but literally a day before my release, Sheikh Omar visited me in detention, and that I think despite many I think it was rescheduled a couple of times, but subhanallah, it happened that we met a day before my release. We had no idea whatsoever that I think it was a Thursday when you visited me, but we had no idea that on Friday I may be released. Like the chances were very close to zero. And Sheikh Omar told me about his time visiting Dr. Badr in Texas, and about the importance of dua. And you started, um, um, reciting some du'as, and I would write them after after you. And during that, I think it was less than 24 hours. I remember every hour or two, I would recite the dua of Sayyidina Yunus. Even at Fajr, I literally woke up in the middle of night and I recited it to myself. And subhanallah, like the day after, I was released. And if by anything, that made me believe more and more in the power of dua, in the divine intervention in such moments.
ما دعا بها أحد إلا فرج الله عنه. No one makes dua with the dua of Yunus alayhi salam except that Allah Azza wa Jalla relieves them. Something you mentioned about Yusuf alayhi salam, one of the beauties of Yusuf alayhi salam is that when they saw him in prison, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, the prisoner said, Inna naraka min al-muhsinin. We see you to be from the good doers. That's the same sentence that is said to him when he is on the throne, Inna naraka min al-muhsinin, that his brothers say to him, we see you to be from the good doers, from the muhsinin. And in that, subhanAllah, is something very beautiful that Yusuf alayhi salam, whether he was in a prison cell or he was the equivalent of a prime minister, he was in charge, he still emanated ihsan, he still cared about the people, he still showed excellence, his character was consistent. And he was advocating, right? He was being there for the prisoners, as you said. SubhanAllah, it stood out to me that I remember watching the press conference on Friday when you came out quickly, in Gina. And by the way, for those of you that don't know about the history of Gina, Louisiana, I'm from Louisiana. Gina is a place that is notorious for racism. It's one of the most racist cities in Louisiana. That's saying a lot as to what's happened in that place. Some of you might remember the Gina 6, 19 years ago. There's a whole history and legacy there. And I remember in the press conference, the short time that you had, you talked about the prisoners on the inside. What perspective did you gain about prison in America and prisoners in America in that period that you didn't already know? You know, like you say this and everyone says this when they go in there. I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was this bad. Liqa mentioned this, subhanAllah. She says this. She says she said in Arabic that, I used to, I used to think of myself as someone who knows politics and who knows America very well. But she's like, this showed me a side of America that, like, I was only like 5% of diagnosing how bad it actually is. So what did this teach you about prison and prisoners in America?
No, Liqa is absolutely right. And the moment I got into Gina, like I was shocked because I never imagined that such injustices happens like around us, happen on U.S. soil, because we only see the rule of law, the democracy, and the Constitution, and we never think about what happens behind the walls of especially ICE detention, because it might be a little bit different in federal court. But in ICE detention, because the government acts with impunity, that those immigrants, no one cares about them. They don't have a Congress member to actually advocate on their behalf. And just the moment I entered that facility, I knew that I have no rights whatsoever. Even when I talk to other detainees who were languishing there for years, and they don't know like what will happen next with their case. So and similar to Liqa, like I thought myself to be like very well informed about like U.S. politics, about what's happening around me. But never in my life I had the thought that all these grave injustices happening around us, and we are silent about them. And especially now when it's becoming more and more um, obvious and more in the media. I don't think there would be like a justification like for us to remain silent when we see such injustices happening around us. And that made me feel, sometimes they tell you, you are in America, you are very far from all these injustices. Why do you care about what's happening in Palestine and Congo and Sudan? But believe me, injustices are at our doors. And it only take a minute for us to be impacted by these injustices. That's why I feel the responsibility to act and to actually continue speaking up about these injustices.
SubhanAllah, the ICE detention center that you were in, because they're not all the same, right? Like people will get thrown from one to the other. You've got the ICE detention centers that are kind of like situated in the middle of like cities, and people just drive past them. They don't realize they're right off their highway. And it's kind of the sickness that we're living through, is that right off that exit, you got a Walmart, you have a weapons manufacturer, you have an ICE detention center, but they're unmarked buildings and you're not paying attention to what they actually are. And then a lot of these ICE detention centers are in the middle of nowhere, literally out of sight, out of mind. And I actually looked into the history of the one that you were in, and it used to be a juvenile detention center, right? But it was deemed to be unfit to be a juvenile detention center because immigrants in particular don't have any access to just basic rights, right? Like what are they going to complain about? They're aliens. They don't have, legal support. I don't want to let you call your lawyer. What are you going to do about it? I don't want to let you call your family, right? They're able to just take it that much further when it comes to our brothers and sisters that are in these cells. And I think that if Muslims were made aware of what's happening to people there, and recognizing that just as Americans, the average American is having this wake-up call that maybe the people of Gaza are not who we thought they were, maybe Palestinians are not these, subhuman beings that we thought they were, maybe Muslims will start waking up a bit and realizing like maybe these people in these ICE detention centers are not who we've been taught they are. Maybe these people that are being abducted are not just, opportunists that jumped the fence and came here because they wanted to make a little bit of extra money and that deserve this treatment. Maybe they're not who we thought they were, right? Maybe it'll open their mind.